at the bottom?
That's a good question. Now, if you look at the Chinese stock market, you find that whether it's buying or selling, it oftentimes is discriminate. That is that in bull markets, the good and the bad stocks will get bought up. Likewise, in a bear market, the selling will be indiscriminate across the board, and even stocks with strong fundamentals will decline. And therefore, we think that the strategy for next year would be to buy stocks of companies with strong fundamentals, and yet, the growth prospects for, say, 2019 and beyond will still be good. We say this because, yes?
Please continue.
Yeah, we say this because I think the outlook for 2019 is still very murky because the overarching issue faced by not just the Chinese stock market, but probably the global equity markets is the Cold War that seems to have been launched by Washington against China. Because the issues involved extend beyond trade, and the issues are complex, and it seems that the gap between Washington and Beijing is still huge. So I think even Washington and Beijing have no idea whether the negotiations in coming rounds will lead to a settlement. We are a fund manager, and therefore we have no idea what the outcome will be. Instead, maybe I can paint 3 scenarios for you. One is that because the issues are so complex, there would not be any agreement, and as a result, the U.S. will continue to impose tariffs on the remaining China imports, and then launch other hostile actions against China. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, Colin, we got to leave it there for now. Thank you for coming on the program. And of course, let's revisit all these themes in 3 months and really see where we are valuation-wise and whether or not there is value to be had here. Wong Kok Hoi there, APS Asset Management founder and CIO.
Okay, let's move along. Have a look at some of these first word news headlines as we head down to Sydney. And again, look at this vexed issue of Britain trying to leave the European Union. Here's Paul Allen.
Thanks, Rish. Brexit negotiators are working through the night in Brussels after Theresa May and Jean-Claude Juncker said they'd made progress in last-minute talks. The two will meet again on Saturday, with the EU saying the text must be finalised on Thursday, or a planned summit on Sunday will be called off. May earlier warned the Commons that voting against her draft deal could mean Brexit is thwarted outright.
The point that has been made by a number of my colleagues in relation to the vote that will come before this House on a meaningful vote on a deal from the European Union is very simple. If you look at the alternative to having that deal with the European Union, it will either be more uncertainty, more division, or it could risk no Brexit at all.
The European Union is stepping up its budget dispute with Italy. The bloc's economy chief saying Rome's, quote, free rider behaviour threatens the 19-nation euro area. Pierre Moscovici told Bloomberg the populist government's spending plan will only increase debts and fail to produce growth. The EU is taking the first steps towards disciplining Italy for breaking up the euro area's budget rules.
The structural deficit, the one which is capable of reducing debt, is way too high. And on these 3 parameters, we've asked questions and we've raised doubts. We received no answer. That's why we are persisting, and we see that undoubtedly there is a very serious deviation to our rules, which is bad for the Eurozone and bad for Italy as well. It has to be corrected one way or another.
Saudi Arabian oil production surged to a record 11 million barrels a day this month as demand climbed and supplies from Iran were disrupted. Sources tell us the gain is due to a drawdown from domestic and overseas inventory. Separately, OPEC is bracing for a bigger challenge from the US next year, with producers in the Permian Basin expected to raise output even further. China's Orwellian plan to judge each of its 1.3 billion people based on social behavior is moving a step closer to reality. Beijing is set to adopt a lifelong points program by 2021 that assigns personalized ratings for each resident. Officials will pull data from several departments to reward and punish the capital's 22 million citizens based on their actions and reputations. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Paul Allen. This is Bloomberg.
Coming up, a fractured Nissan board divided on Carlos Ghosn's fate and the alliance that he created facing tensions and perhaps the prospect of it being torn by the seams. We have the latest developments live from the Nissan headquarters in Yokohama. This is Bloomberg.
Sustainable and inclusive future. Join the influential figures from around the world. More than 100 distinguished speakers and 3,000 global finance and business leaders will be on hand to exchange insights, network, and do business. The Asian Financial Forum, January 14th and 15th in Hong Kong. Be a part of it.
It's a fire chief's job to give their firefighters every chance to be safe and save people. I know that if I protect my people, that they protect the public.
Innovation is really important to us at 3M. We're really encouraged to think about how we can use the technologies that we have to solve new challenges every day.
All the new technology from 3M Scott saves seconds, minutes off of a rescue. That is the difference between somebody taking their last breath and walking away the next day.
What do you know about Kazakhstan? The gateway between Europe and Asia, with a diverse range of investment opportunities. And home to the Astana International Financial Center, the first and only financial center in Central Asia. This is ambition. This is opportunity. This is Kazakhstan. Open for business.
Clearly, there's a deceleration due to the soft macro, but what we can get some comfort from this number is that Chinese consumers are slowing, they are not collapsing. Merchandisers are clearly doing more aggressive discountings and the promotions to keep the inventory going to a destocking. So perhaps that's also why we are seeing a slightly higher than the expected GMV growth.
Look at some of the stories trending across the Bloomberg universe. The most read story here today on the terminal. The Fed seemed primed for a pause in 2019 amid slowing global growth prospects and volatile financial markets. And over on TikTok, it is almost turkey time for some. See what's in store for this year's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It includes a 56-foot-tall Goku from Dragon Ball Z. Talk about memory lane. But yeah, looking forward to that turkey. And on Bloomberg.com, follow the unfolding drama over Nissan and Carlos Ghosn. Check out those stories trending on Bloomberg Online or on the terminal. Guys.
Yeah, in fact, let's stay on Nissan here. As Yvonne was pointing out, that's, well, lots of angles to the story. Well, the chairman, Carlos Ghosn, will be learning his fate a bit later on today, of course, when the board will meet and discuss these allegations that he underreported how much he earned, his income, and also misused company assets.
Yeah, let's get it over to JSC Automotive Consulting MD, Jochen Siebert. Jochen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What's your take on all this, in broad brushstrokes, first of all?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me here. I think what we see here is that Nissan is not happy with having Renault in the board all the time and trying to call the shots, especially with Carlos Ghosn in the helm, of course. So I think from the Nissan point of view, it's time to move on, and that's kind of the broad brush. What it means, we'll have to see.
Does this cost, we've been asking this question to a lot of our guests, does this cost the alliance, the existence of this alliance moving forward?
Well, we'll have to see what is next. So today, it's quite likely, as I understand, that Carlos Ghosn will be gone as chairman of Nissan, but he still has the role as chairman of the Nissan-Renault Alliance, which is, in my opinion, more important. That's the 50-50 joint venture where they actually pool resources on engineering, sourcing, etc. And this is where the economies of scale come in between Nissan and Renault. And that would be the next step. And in that board, there is a 50-50 between Nissan and Renault, and that will be more important than Nissan. That's not to say that it's not important what happens at Nissan today, but it's not the ultimate deciding factor. If the Nissan alliance would break down or become dysfunctional, that would be bad news for both Nissan and Renault, but more so for Renault. Renault only makes about 3.5 million cars, which is not much compared to, let's say, Volkswagen, GM and Toyota, which each make 10 million. And it will also not be as good for Nissan, which only makes 5.5 on its own. Maybe together with Mitsubishi if they stay on for some reason, but Mitsubishi is only a small maker of only less than 1 million. So whichever way happens, it would also be bad for Nissan, but definitely for Renault, which then would become a takeover target, and it would be interesting, or let's say would be interesting, what the French government would do about it. After all, they own 20% of Renault. So that's for me the story here, the main story.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing would be another French grand champion here with the PSA merger, Peugeot-Citroën. But let's leave that to one side at the moment. But how much do you think those people who've been critical of Renault's relationship with Nissan, that they've had a free ride, the French car maker here, with Nissan, how much do you agree with that?
In a way, I would agree. On the other hand, Nissan has got something out of Renault as well, apart from the economies of scale, additional economies of scale. They also got some engineering knowledge about diesel engines. Okay, that's not a big topic at this point anymore. And Renault certainly helped Nissan to get some more traction in Europe, etc. And it's not that bad. And if you put them together, they actually have a complementary geographical footprint, if you want. So Renault is strong in South America, Europe, etc., and Nissan is strong everywhere else. So it kind of gels, and I think it's not only it would be one-sided to say Nissan or Renault was a free rider. I personally don't think so, but I can understand it, let's put it that way, from the Japanese point of view. Yes.
All right, Jochen, thank you so much for coming on the program. Jochen Siebert there, JSC Automotive Consulting Managing Director. Right, let's, we're about 20 minutes into the session here in Hong Kong and China. What do we have movers-wise?
Well, chip makers are watching those. Of course, this tech rebound certainly helping things when it comes to some of these chip stocks. So these Taiwanese makers, like the likes of Winbond, were up about 1.8% right now. Samsung also up about 0.6%. SK Hynix also up more than 1.5% here today. It's interesting because remember the Morgan Stanley analyst back in August who first made the warning that we could be seeing a potential downturn in chip stocks? Well, overnight he came out with a report saying we're not completely out of the woods just yet, saying that in fact some of these stocks have not fully priced in the weaker growth and a weaker demand and growth prospects there. And so perhaps we could see some more declines here even after the sharp declines that we have seen for much of this year. Also want to take a look at Sasa in particular. You guys kind of highlighted this stock earlier. Earnings were actually pretty good. Profits surged some 84% here from a year ago. And they did cite the fact that this development in the Greater Bay Area was really helping to drive a lot of these mainland tourists to Hong Kong to shop. But Citigroup coming up with an interesting note here as well. They've downgraded and cut to sell for the stock and saying that third quarter till now, same-store sales are actually worse than expected. They're saying that perhaps these transportation flows are not enough to offset some of this consumer weakness. They're weakening purchasing power also when it comes to that slowing economy in China as well, guys.
Yep, all right. Lots more coming up here in the program. We'll be back. This is Bloomberg.
As CEO of Interactive Brokers, my job is to execute your orders at the best price. We do not trade against your orders or sell them to others and pocket the money. We cut out the middleman. This year we have executed over 50 million stock orders at an average commission of $2.20. Bring your account to Interactive Brokers and keep the difference.
Success comes in many shapes and forms. It comes in the most likely and unlikely places. It is the path leading up to it that remains the same. Dedication, hard work, and an absolute will to win. To succeed, you must do things differently. FX Pro. Trade like a pro.
Theresa May will try to sell her Brexit deal to business leaders as she fights opposition in Parliament.
That agreement is a good one for the UK, and let no one be in any doubt. I am determined to deliver it.
US shale, in order to avoid a supply crunch, needs to increase in the next 7 years more than 10 million barrels per day, which means US shale needs to add one Russia, even more than that.
Everybody's trying to do his or her best to avoid negative outcomes, and in that sense I'm also confident that the situation can be managed. But that of course means that everybody has to prepare also for a negative scenario.
Let's have a look at these Chinese steelmakers on the way down. This is after a move up in the session Wednesday on news that China's eyeing a mega merger between the parent companies of Baoshan and Steel here. This is a look at what's going on. Angang Steel there down 3.3%. Bao Steel a 2.1% move to the downside there. Now move would create the world's biggest steel company. It would top ArcelorMittal, who are currently hold that position.
Yep, let's get more into the story here. James Poole, our Asia commodities editor, joins us with more details here. So it does make sense, I think, scale-wise, James, but why are we thinking that there might be a merger on the cards here?
Well, I think it's something the Chinese steel industry, Chinese government's been trying to do for a very long time. It's trying to bring together, there are many, many small steel makers in China. They want to bring them together into a small group of large mills, and their target is to have 60% of China's steel production in the hands of the top 10 mills by 2020. So this is part of that strategy. One has to put it in perspective. I mean, China is it produces half the world's steel. So that is enormous. It has the largest exports. They've been coming down, but it has large steel exports that have in the past disrupted global markets. So this is very significant, not just for what's happening inside China, but for steel makers in Japan, Korea, and elsewhere, and also for steel prices globally.
James, does it make industrial logical sense?
Well, I think it probably does, because if you have a lot of small players, they tend perhaps not to be so efficient. They tend to be a bit more polluting. But, you know, one of the big drives in China's 5-year plan is to reduce pollution, to cut bloated capacity in the steel industry, and to make just the steel sector much more efficient. So from an industrial point of view, I think what they're aiming for is to have a large producer, which is this new one, which is a combination of the first, the biggest, and the third biggest producers in China. And that would be more efficient, it would move up the value curve, it would produce high quality products and be less polluting and have modern technology. So it's really something that the government is trying to do across the board, not just in steel, but in other state-owned industries as well, to make them more efficient.
Right, well, this is something which is going to perhaps ruffle the feathers of ArcelorMittal and some of the other steel makers out there as well. In what prism do you think they're very, very quickly seeing this move? Very, very quickly, James.
Well, I think there will be slight concern to have another big competitor, more powerful competitor. They'll have to really re-rate their game in Japan and Korea, particularly in the regional markets. So it's going to be very, very big factor for them when this happens in 2020.
James, thanks a lot for that. James Poole in Singapore for his Asia Commodities editor. Let's have a look at the business flash headlines. We've got China Eastern buying a stake in Junyao Air. It's a deal worth some $450 million US. Money raised will be used to buy 3 new aircraft from Boeing and a standby engine, as well as repay some bank loans. The deal is part of Junyao's plan to expand at home and abroad and is in response to the government's call to boost the private sector. Junyao's parent holds 18% of China Eastern's Wuhan branch.
Now, top Apple supplier Foxconn is planning major cost cuts, reducing spending by almost $3 billion. An internal memo says that its iPhone operation must lower expenses by $900 million. This is US dollars here. 10% of non-technical staff will be let go.
Amazon says it has mistakenly shared customer data with unidentified third parties as the holiday shopping season gets into top gear. It's written to a number of customers to say their emails and names have been inadvertently shared due to a technical glitch that has now been fixed. Amazon says there's no need to change passwords.
And coming up here, we discuss market strategy. Deep Blue Global Investments hedge fund here, Tony Han, joins us to talk more where we go from here.
And we got the latest developments in trade flows, looking at all of this from a Traders' head of Asia Pacific Risk.
January 14th and 15th in Hong Kong. Be a part of it.
This is news, but not as you know it. This is TikTok by Bloomberg, the first and only global news network built for Twitter. Objective reporting that you can trust. Curated comments that provide insight. TikTok by Bloomberg. 24/7 news streaming live on Twitter.
Almost 10 a.m. here in Hong Kong, almost 11 a.m. at the Nissan headquarters in Yokohama. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Here are the top stories this morning. Markets treading water as energy and tech optimism start to drain away. Oil rises from a one-year low.
Now, Apple's top Asian supplier plans wide-ranging cost cuts here. So we're talking about Foxconn. Says, well, next year will be difficult and increasingly competitive.
And Carlos Ghosn, awaiting his fate, says Nissan directors prepare to meet. We're told the board is split. We're going to be headed to Yokohama.
Yeah, as you saw with that MSCI Asia. We're pretty much flat here in the region. Not really here or there here today. Of course, yes, we got that comeback on the U.S. session, but it wasn't a really big one either, given the Thanksgiving holiday.
Don't really know what to add to that. Really.
Right?
I mean, okay, let's mention Japan. Inflation was out half of where they needed to be. Growth out of Singapore, 3%.
Yeah.
About 25%, well, a quarter less below what was expected anyway. So
perhaps a little bit of light at the end of that trade tunnel as well, with the omission of Martin Navarro, a trade hawk, from visiting Buenos Aires, where that G20 summit is taking place. And of course, we've got that sideline meeting taking place between Presidents Xi and Trump. Looking at the markets at the moment, looking a bit of a mixed bag here. This is the position at the moment. We've got Hong Kong now turning down, 1/3 of 1%, as is China. Elsewhere, just some positivity coming through currently from there in New Zealand, Australia as well. Some of the markets which haven't been doing that well. TAIEX flirting with the gain line there as well. Now, what we do have is that bit of a reprieve on the markets yesterday. We saw that happen, and as a result of the price action in the US, seeing perhaps a little bit of a tailwind coming through for this part of the world, but not so much, because we have turned down as the old, I suppose, fears have returned. Look at what's going on with Brent crude and WTI crude. They're down at the moment once again, but we did actually see them bounce up from lows that we haven't seen for about a year. This is what's going on as well. We've got Brexit, of course, still very much also front and centre, as we have Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, just at the moment trying to hammer out another agreement with the European Commission. Let's get more on the market action then. Bring in Mark Cudmore. He is MLI's managing editor. And Mark, what are you making of what's happening? Of course, it is Thanksgiving at the moment, going into Thanksgiving. Volumes are likely to fall off a cliff. Volatility, therefore, could really return too.
Well, volumes are definitely low. I think the E-mini futures are running about 40% of the daily average at this time of day, just before I came into the studio. Overall, the price action is looking very negative for most traders across most assets. In fact, yesterday's rebounds were probably the most worrying sign, in terms that there were such tepid rebounds given the losses that we'd seen in the previous session. We kind of barely clawed back much of what we've kind of seen the previous declines, and that shows a market that hasn't seen the final capitulation yet. This is a market that still has sellers out there, and it's probably worrying that there weren't this kind of overhang of buyers looking to close at their shorts before the holiday. That shows that bears are still confident there's more downside, and certainly they're the people with the stronger kind of positions at the moment. Overall, in the days ahead, I think most assets, risk assets, are going to remain on the back foot.
Yeah, Mark, away from the equity markets for just a moment here, two things caught my eye this morning, and let me know if there's any relevance here. One was just the repricing that's going on in the bond markets, and just when it comes to the Fed, I mean, you have break-evens below 2% on the 10-year. The other is oil, and where you have the loonie, for example, and the ringgit, this part of the world, also seeing a bit of pressure. Which one do you think is a bigger play these next few days?
I think that the bigger play, the more important one, is perhaps the oil market, but maybe not in the short term. That's a bit more of a longer-term theme that we're seeing, record supply in the US, records pumping in out of OPEC, out of Saudi Arabia, and the fact is we're seeing that the Permian Basin is expected next year to kind of produce incredible levels of oil, which shows that this is a supply-driven collapse in oil overall, and that we can't expect oil markets to get back to the peaks we've seen this year anytime soon, if at all. So therefore, I think that overall, that kind of theme of oil markets being lower, that is generally a good news for growth if it's supply driven, which this move is largely, but as you mentioned, it's very bad for exporters like Canada. The other theme on terms of the Fed repricing, that will provide further volatility for the market either way. We're in a late cycle situation where people are wondering whether the Fed is going too far. We're getting closer to that neutral rate, we're getting closer to the terminal rate, and that means we have much more uncertainty about exactly how many more rate hikes we're going to have and when they'll come, and that means that rate volatility, and hence further asset volatility, is going to be a theme that's going to stick with us for the next few months. Perhaps in the short term that's more relevant, but not the bigger macro theme.
And Mark, we were talking about Peter Navarro, the trade hawk within the U.S. administration that's not going to be at G20 potentially, according to reports. Should anyone be realigning expectations ahead of that for next week?
I think that's obviously a positive symbol, and I think that there should be a little bit of extra hope that we might get some positive signal out of trade talks next week because of this move. I'm surprised that Asia hasn't been a little bit more excited by it, but I guess the traders have seen so many false dawns on this trade front that no one wants to get too carried away. So definitely I think that people can go into the Buenos Aires meeting with a little bit of hope, but it's unlikely we're going to get any conclusive deal either way. What we don't want to see is that both sides walk away kind of very negative and trading barbs again. What we want to see is at least that there's this strong accord that they want to get towards an agreement. But I think traders have come around to realize that even if they're positive towards each other, there's unlikely to be a clear agreement anytime soon.
Mark, we've got to leave there. Mark Cudmore, our MLive strategist there, of course, who oversees the team there over in Singapore. Thank you. All right, so for more on Mark's work, have a look at all the commentary there. Mark was speaking about traders there. One of the themes that they're following there on our MLive blog, traders still looking for reasons to be thankful. So check it out. Other themes there, MLive, go one click, and you basically get everything. Scroll up and scroll down. So check it out for our Bloomberg clients.
In the meantime, let's get you caught up with the first word news. Paul Allen joining us with the latest out of Sydney. Paul.
Thanks, Yvonne. Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn may learn his fate later on Thursday when the board meets to discuss his arrest for alleged financial misconduct. CEO Hiroto Saikawa has already said he will be dismissed, but our sources say directors are split over what to do. Ghosn is accused of underreporting compensation and misusing company funds. We're told some directors feel they don't have enough information to vote. Facebook has admitted asking consulting firm Definers to investigate George Soros after the billionaire criticized the social network. Facebook's head of communications says they wanted to figure out whether Soros had any financial motivation for calling it a menace to society. COO Sheryl Sandberg says it was never Facebook's intention to play into an anti-Semitic narrative against Soros or anyone else. Google is to roll out new policies in Europe to offer more transparency around political ads. The announcement follows a year of scrutiny over how internet platforms were used to spread misinformation during elections. The lack of disclosure about who pays for political ads has been a particular sore point. Google will now require advertisers to apply and be verified before they can pay for political messages. The head of the OECD is warning that rising protectionism and a lack of international cooperation threatens the global economy. Anhel Hurria says growth has passed its peak and faces rising threats from trade disputes and higher rates. The group is cutting its forecast for global growth next year from 3.7% to 3.5%, saying uncertainty is adding to the slowdown.
Today's economic outlook points to a global economy that is losing steam. The imposition of new tariffs, uncertainty about further restrictive trade actions are contributing to a marked slowdown in trade growth, dampening global investment and threatening jobs and living standards.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Paul Allen. This is Bloomberg.
Well, still ahead, we are gauging the risks from the trade war with treaties to hear why they're not worried and say tensions may even have some positive consequences.
Yeah, but before that, it's time to talk bonds. With Deep Blue Global Investment CIO Tong Lee Han, he was with PIMCO. He helped us rescue the world, of course, back in 2008. Interesting comments coming from him. We'll get to those views in just a few minutes.
Don't forget, terminal subscribers can join the chat by sending us instant messages during our programming. Just go to TV Go, and there you go. Steve in England are talking to me a little while ago, and you just simply press that button to ask the guest a question. This is Bloomberg.
To succeed, sometimes you must step into your comfort zone. Prepare, think ahead, anticipate. Choose your next move carefully. Time it to the millisecond and execute with precision. To succeed, you must do things differently. FX Pro. Trade like a pro.
I'd say they're very stable, and I welcome that. And Australia has always, I think, sought to be a very productive partner in our comprehensive strategic partnership. That is the official status of the relationship.
These will be co-equal headquarters. We'll have shareholders meetings in these headquarters. We'll have board of directors meetings. We'll have our all-hands meetings, our employee meetings in New York and the D.C. area, just like we have them now in Seattle.
Welcome back. Just an update on Nissan. We have a time now, according to TV Asahi, of when the board meeting will be taking place. 4:30 p.m. Japan time, I imagine that would be. It's a couple of hours from now, late afternoon. Right, from Nissan, let's have a look at the Fed here. No shortage, really, of debate over policy and where they go from here. In fact, next week should actually bring a lot more, or some clarity, hopefully, over whether or not they will stick to their guns. A lot of speakers. You have Rich Clarida. He's speaking in New York on Tuesday. Jay Powell follows on Wednesday. A lot of things happening, of course.
You got Fed minutes. You have John Williams also speaking. So plenty of Fed speak. Enough for us next week after the holidays here. Here to talk us through is from Deep Blue Global Investment CIO, Tong Li Han, here in our Hong Kong studio. Tong Li, always great to see you.
Good morning.
So, I mean, this is what some say is the prime opportunity for us to learn a little bit more from the Fed on what the path is for 2019. Do you think that they're going to have to remove kind of this dovishness that was been pricing in the markets, or they're going to have to jawbone things and set it back on a hawkish path?
I think it's going to be very hard to forecast what Fed will do in next year, but we are pretty sure that beyond the inflation that Fed fund has been targeting in the past several decades, right now they get a new mandate from President Trump that they are targeting the S&P 500, the stock market as well. So I'm not as...
not formally, though.
Not formally, but effectively they are targeting, they are forced to target the equity market, which I think is not absolutely wrong, because the U.S. equity market is actually the core assets of the U.S. economy, because the household investment in the equities market has reached a historical high, and the household consumption accounting for the lion's share of the U.S. GDP growth. So if we are seeing a tumbling in price of the U.S. equity market, we are going to see a much softer GDP growth going forward.
Is that why the expectations for the Fed next month and next year seem to be getting adjusted lower? Or why do you think that's happening? Why do you think we're seeing...
Yeah, as I said, it's very hard to make the forecast of what they are going to do. But right now, the 10-year yield, as I mentioned during our last interview in the beginning of October, as I said, the 10-year yield is trading at that time was trading at 3.2%. That is around that implied that the final Fed fund rate will be 100 bips higher than the 10-year yield, which gave you 4.25% of the final Fed fund rate in the end of this hiking.
So 4 hikes is what you're saying.
8 hikes. Right now it's 2.25.
Oh, sorry, yes, 3 and 25 is neutral. Okay.
Yeah. So if the Fed still stick to the current pace of the rate hiking, that will take another 2 years. That is too optimistic about the U.S. economy, and too optimistic about the U.S. economy's tolerance to the rising funding cost.
And you made the right call. You were long treasuries at that point, and we are seeing this rally in bonds. So do you think that things could go further lower for yields, or are we going to be hitting a stall button now?
Yeah, I think the long end yield will be stuck here in a pretty tight range around here in the next couple months until we see a very soft patch of the U.S. Economic data coming out. I believe that is going to happen by Q2 of next year.
What else have you been busy with? I think you were here 7 weeks ago, I think, on this show. What's been going on in the Tong Li Han hedge fund world? What have you been buying?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I've been buying the U.S. Treasuries futures, and I've been buying the put options on the U.S. equities.
That's worked out for you.
So you said you're taking some profits out of those put options now when it comes to U.S. equities.
Right.
What else are you looking for 2019 then? Is it time to rotate out of the U.S., so to speak? I mean, Europe's still going through Brexit and Italy, so that's not doing very well. Asia itself, I mean, it seems like we priced in a lot of the negativity already. Is Asia still the safest bet?
Yeah, I think, I think emerging markets will enjoy a rally if the Fed take a pause on its rate hike. And if it's not going to happen, then if the long end yield just get stuck here or trade much lower from here, the emerging markets will also get a rally, especially for those countries who are very reliant on the external financial conditions, very sensitive to the U.S. dollar funding cost, like those countries who
current account deficit
increase in this year. Yeah, right.
As far as that's concerned, do you think it's the Fed stepping back will be enough to alleviate the liquidity shortage? Because you're also mentioning something here, that the market structure, passive investments, people don't seem to be discounting the effect that's had on just sucking all the dollars out of the system.
Right. Yeah, that is the biggest risk that the market kind of overlooked in the past, because there's since the financial crisis of 2008, the popularity of the passive investment strategies has been growing. The ETF, for example, the ETF accounting for over 1/3 of the U.S. equities market.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we have the volatility targeted portfolios, the risk parity portfolios. In the meanwhile, this shortage of market, how to say the popularity of the passive investment style met with a shortage of the market liquidity because of the Volcker rule, who pushed the investment banks out of the market making business. They don't have right now we don't have the cushion to absorb the market liquidity as before the crisis. So, and also on top of that, there's also a popular trend of the CTA trade, algo trade, who just chasing the momentum, the current momentum, and to how to say the exemplify. The market moves. Yeah.
I want to ask you about credit as well. I mean, we've seen deteriorating conditions quite a bit, not just in the U.S., Asia here as well, spreads widening. And do you think it's a worrying sign to you? What does it tell you at the moment?
So it tells me that it's kind of a warning sign, because many people argue that the U.S. fundamental economy is very very strong, given the credit leverage has been very low for all of the fundamental economic sectors, like the household, the corporates, and the household sector, corporate sector, and the government sector. Yeah, government sector is an exemption. Anyway, but actually the market leverage is the biggest imbalance of this economic setup right now, which if this imbalance met with a trigger event, that will cause a market crash and maybe a collapse of the economy.
All right. Happy Thanksgiving.
On that note,
thank you.
Thank you, Tong Li Han there, Deep Blue Global Investments CIO, joining us here in Hong Kong. Let's get the latest business flash right now. Goldman Sachs Malaysia headache is intensifying, with two Abu Dhabi investment funds claiming they suffered losses from the bank's role in the 1MDB case. International Petroleum Investment and Abar Investments filed a suit saying Goldman bribed former officials to, quote, manipulate and mislead the claimants and to misuse information to further the criminal scheme and to benefit personal personally.
Now, Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group fell the most, in fact, on the Topix Banks Index. This after the New York Times here reported that it was subpoenaed by U.S. prosecutors last year, in this case, of course, involving North Korea. The Times says that the state of New York claimed MUFG had intentionally bypassed a block on doing business with the sanctioned people and companies there. Now, the bank declined to comment to Bloomberg News.
Airbus is hiring staff to work on a new single-aisle plane to be powered by next-generation engines. The short-haul jet will be the first entirely new narrow-body Airbus will have brought to market since the A320 debuted in 1984. It's also revamping the twin-aisle A350, which will also use the new turbine and take the NEO name. Airbus plans to boost production to compete with Boeing.
Now, coming up, we're talking Nissan here. So we mentioned that meeting will be taking place in about 5 hours from now in Yokohama as details emerge about the alleged misdeeds of Carlos Ghosn. The board prepares, of course, to discuss his fates.
We're live at the carmaker's Yokohama headquarters. Next, this is Bloomberg.
As the world accelerates, the only constant is change. Many resist it, but a smart investor sees opportunity. Trading CME Group futures at Interactive Brokers puts you in command. Cutting-edge technology and powerful analytics give you the tools to navigate evolving markets. And with low-cost trades and 24-hour direct access to 120 global exchanges, opportunity is at your fingertips. And all from one account. Stay ahead of the curve with Interactive Brokers and CME Group futures.
The first thing I'd like to point out, Euromoney named us the world's best digital bank twice. One of their important points in the citation was that this digital transformation is more pervasive at DBS than most companies. And I think that's been an extremely important part of getting this recognition. A great opportunity to reimagine banking on the other side. I think we've only begun to scratch the surface.
At DBS, we certainly inculcate ESG, sustainability, gender equality, CSR into everything we do. It could be internal to the bank or to our customers or on our products or on our platforms. The whole concept of investing for profits is now morphing into not just investing for profits, but investing for good and investing for impact.
It really is about putting the customer at the center of everything that we do, having customer journey thinking in all our applications and all our processes and all our products are offering.
We have to do more to ensure that the benefits of a growing economy are spread far and wide. This is a forum to help make it happen.
This is a big task, but the challenge is also vast.
It's certainly not impossible in the long run.
We are interdependent on each other.
Lots of conversations to be had, including some with very special guests.
This is the right time to look at a deep structural shift in the global economy.
And that depends on both China and the United States.
Let's have a look at the equity position in Tokyo. Just seeing what's going on here at the moment. Nikkei 225 just about flat right now. Likewise, the Topix, not much action for what's going on with the yen either. There you go, 100, just a shy, just a smidgen below 113 yen at the moment. Nikkei 225, Topix also largely shrugging off that inflation reading that we had. Core inflation coming at 1%, pretty much as anticipated, and still way, way below the 2% target that the Bank of Japan does have in place. This is what we have with some of these companies making headlines. Nomura coming out and actually putting a buy rating on Sapporo Brewer, Sapporo Holdings. It should be actually, but it is up 7%. It's in the same conglomerate as it were, and it's the first upgrade that they've given, as you know, Nomura, in 13 months. Shiseido on the way up 3.25%. This is a Japanese. The Japanese consumer stocks generally get a lift up because of evidence that Chinese tourists are coming back to the country. Mitsubishi UFJ off by 3%. This is a New York Times piece which is suggesting that this bank is under investigation right now for possible and alleged impropriety with regard to North Korea. So it's a look at all that. Just having a look at the car makers as we head towards that board meeting taking place 3:30 Hong Kong time, 4:30 Yokohama time. 0.2% up Nissan. Just taking a look at Mitsubishi Motors having a bit of a hit there, 0.75% to the downside. And there you go, mixed bag here as we await the fate of a certain Carlos Ghosn.
Yeah, that's going to be the big story later on here this afternoon. Carlos Ghosn, of course, to learn his fate later on Thursday when the board of Nissan meets to discuss his arrest for financial misconduct. Sources are close to the meeting indicate a split on whether to dismiss Ghosn, who has been in detention since Monday.
Yep. Stephen Engel is our man on the ground just outside of Nissan headquarters, in fact, there in Yokohama. So, Steve, give us a preview.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy day today. Of course, the Tokyo prosecutors are also going to have a press conference at 4 local time, 3 Hong Kong. We're also going to get that board meeting starting at 4:30 local, 3:30 Hong Kong. And that's where Carlos Ghosn, at least his fate at Nissan, will be likely decided whether Sakawa-san, the CEO, and his faction can successfully oust Carlos Ghosn. It looks like he might have the votes. We can break that down in a second. But the big question, of course, is about what's the next step in the future of the alliance. As it looks as though, of course, Renault earlier this week, when these revelations came forward, was caught off guard. They do own 43% of Nissan, and it looks as though they were not necessarily informed of these actions taken by Saikawa-san and then the board vote later today. One thing I can tell you, though, David, the flags outside the headquarters here, they're still flying at full mast. That's the French flag, the Japanese flag, and the Nissan flag. Not half-staff yet, okay? So let's not put the stake in the grave just yet for the alliance.
Right, and Steve, we've been hearing that it's going to be, even if things stay the same, or at least this alliance is still intact, that it's still going to be very tough. You were speaking to CLSA about how it's going to be tough to really repair this alliance moving forward. And of course, we've seen headline over there in Japan as we speak. What is the local media saying about the drama now?
Yeah, there's new reports surfacing just about every minute coming from the local media. The latest one is coming from one of the newspapers here, the Asahi, basically saying that the Tokyo prosecutors have evidence from executives within Nissan who struck plea bargains with prosecutors